All right, this is part 2 of a 3-part series on the very confused period of Seventh-day Adventism in trying to figure out which Sabbath to keep. Sabbath confusion reigns big here for 9 years. Let's just do, by the way, part 1 is linked below. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. I think you need to watch it in order to understand this one even more. But in summary, here's what we learned in part 1. The very first Sabbath-keeping church, Washington, New Hampshire, in the spring of 1844, when Seventh-day Baptist Rachel Preston shows up with a bunch of tracts in her hand, converts these Adventists into Sabbatarian Adventists. So there it is. Seventh-day Adventist Bible study? No. A Seventh-day Adventist, Seventh-day Baptist with a bunch of tracts in her hand converted you guys. That's all. In the autumn of 1846, right after Ellen White gets married, she says, and you'll see it in the video if you look, Origin and Progress, that she's started keeping the Sabbath. Okay, it was a secret Sabbath because it wasn't for the church yet. That didn't come until April of 1847 when she got this vision here in early writings to keep the Sabbath. So between this autumn of 1846 and April of 1847, I call them the Ellen White secret Sabbaths because they weren't for everyone, but her and James were keeping it. It took a vision in this book to make it doctrine. Isn't that interesting? Ellen White was already keeping the Sabbath. She didn't come out and say, hey, everybody, I studied the Bible, I'm keeping the Sabbath, why don't you? Oh, no, she has to have a vision. Big drama queen that she is, and well, she had one here. And by the way, the 6 o'clock Sabbath that the Seventh-day Adventists were observing is confirmed by the SDA's speaking in tongues and interpretation of tongues, as we can see in Arthur White's book, The Early Years. So Ellen White, as I said in that video, as the spirit of prophecy, utterly failed. You got a church keeping the Sabbath from sunset to sunset. You got the Adventists keeping the Sabbath from 6 o'clock to 6 o'clock, and speaking in tongues and interpretation obviously wasn't true. And your spirit of prophecy was supposed to protect the church against error, sleeping on the job again. Thank you, Ellen White. And then what ended all this was in November of 1855, J.N. Andrews presented a paper to a conference of Adventists, accepted his paper, published December 4th, 1855 in the Review and Herald magazine, and the Sabbath changed. Now that's just kind of a recap of what you saw in the first video. I'm going to move on to 3 issues in this video that maybe are not so obvious problems with this 6 o'clock sunset Sabbath controversy. During this 9-year period when 470 doctrinal wrong Sabbaths were kept by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is still, it's funny, 470 wrong Sabbaths. I'm going to address here first the changing of the Sabbath by Andrews. You know, I thought only the evil Pope, yes, there he is, the evil Pope, could change the Sabbath. Is that true? Ellen White said in this book, in Vision, that the Pope changed the Sabbath. Let's look here at early writings. There it is, 1882. Page 25 is the start of this Sabbath vision of hers, and if you can't read it on screen on the right hand side, it says, but the Pope had changed it from the 7th to the 1st day. Okay, so she's talking about the changing of the day by the Pope. Well, maybe that's not the only change of the Sabbath that could occur, that did occur, that will occur. Well, let's do that, because this vision of hers, by the way, here is absolutely not complete. Her spirit guide angel forgets to tell her that, by the way, Ellen, the Sabbath you're observing at 6 o'clock because you're following this anti-Trinitarian Bates guy, that's not the right Sabbath. You should be going sunset to sunset like the Washington, New Hampshire church, but you won't find any of that here. Her angel was, I think, distracted because he was looking for his gold card, concerned whether he could get back in heaven or not. By the way, you ought to watch the video on gold card carrying angels. But anyway, I digress. So perhaps, like I said, changing the Sabbath is not only the change of the day, but the change of the time. After all, don't you Seventh-day Adventists like to say, look at Daniel 7:25. He shall think to change times and law. Doesn't Daniel 7:25 say he shall change times and law? It certainly does. And Andrews changed the time, didn't he? He did it in 1855. So you know what? You SDAs, you're Sabbath changers. J.N. Andrews is a Sabbath changer. We need to put a little Pope hat on him, because not only the Pope changed the day, Andrews changed the time. They're co-Sabbath changers. Let's look at them here. There's Andrews. He's got his little Pope hat on right there. And there's the December 4th, 1855 magazine that I mentioned, where he changed the Sabbath from 6 o'clock to sunset to sunset. You know what? No honest Seventh-day Adventist will ever tell me again, if you're honest. But then again, there's a reason why I call you guys lying commandment keepers. If you're honest, you'll never say the Pope changed the Sabbath. If you want to say the Pope and J.N. Andrews changed the Sabbath, that's correct. Now you're more correct. Recall this from the first video. That's why I said you got to watch the first video. It was James White in the book The Early Years by Arthur White, who said that it's only going to be Satan who's going to get us off this 6 o'clock hour, and that the Sabbath we got here from Brother Bates is from God. So let's just review that and look at it here. There it is, The Early Years, page 200. James White said what? Satan would get us from this time. He's talking about the 6 o'clock Sabbath. And only Satan's it's going to be a satanic-inspired event to get him off 6 o'clock. And that, well, the Sabbath of Bates is the Sabbath of God. So by definition, James White just called J.N. Andrews Satan for changing the Sabbath. J.N. Andrews is Satan. He needs some little Satan horns now. So let's look right here. There he is. He's got his little Satan horns on, and he's our satanic Sabbath changer, according to James White, right? Not me, but James White. Because it was Satan that got him off the time. It was Andrews that got him off the time. So that makes Andrews Satan. Now, what I found interesting here, and you can see the page, this is the SDA Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists. And I thought, well, surely they're going to have a lot to say about this whole 1855 controversy. So I scrolled down the page, got to 1850 to 1855, and what? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So I kept reading. Okay, let's read 1856. And there it is. One sentence and one footnote. And it says that what his study demonstrated that in Scripture, Sabbath was observed from sunset on Friday to sunset on Saturday. And it references this footnote. And the footnote is, well, there's that very magazine we just looked at, Review and Herald, December 4th, 1855. And I thought, isn't this just the craziest thing? This whole big 1855 Sabbath fiasco was not even mentioned in your Encyclopedia Adventist in 1855. You move it to 1856 and it's just one sentence. Very interesting how they kind of downplay the significance of this, isn't it? Move on to another issue. 6 o'clock Sabbath, right? Move on from satanic Sabbath changer J.N. Andrews to the three angels gospel message. Because this Sabbath change affects the three angels gospel message. By the way, these three angel gospel messages were invented in 1844. Well, this alone is a problem. Hello. Any gospel message invented after this book in 1844, it's a couple years after this book, it's a false gospel. 1844 is a false gospel, but I digress. Let's look here to prove 1844 is the birth of the three angels gospel. We find it here in 1932. It says, we find that no one prior to 1844 had ever claimed to have given this threefold message. There it is. Nobody before 1844 ever taught the three angels messages. That's it. Now, this third angel of the three, this third one, is really concerned with the Sabbath. And let's look here what it says about that. Now, they saw in the preaching of the Sabbath the fulfillment of the third angel's message. There it is, the Sabbath and third angel. This angel warned against the worship of the beast in his image and against the reception of his mark. But this angel is concerned with the Sabbath. What exactly is the Sabbath message and concern with this angel? During this period, now this angel came into existence in 1844. Recall the Sabbath confusion taking place in 1844. First of all, in 1844 it was sunset to sunset. But in 1846, it was 6 o'clock. But yet we have this third angel given a message. Since 1844, what message was the angel given? Was it sunset to sunset? Or was it 6 o'clock to 6 o'clock? We got Sabbath confusion reigning big here. Now we got a very confused gospel angel. Now, Ellen White, remember like I said, observed the Sabbath at 6 o'clock. Washington, New Hampshire Church, observing the Sabbath sunset to sunset. Does this angel even know what Sabbath they're testing when they come back? I have to say, probably not. Who exactly is going to get the mark of the beast when this angel comes back for worshiping on the wrong Sabbath? Will it be the 6 o'clock group? Will it be the sunset group? Hello, Paging Ellen, where are you in the Sabbath? We got a Sabbath mess. Aisle 2, Angel, Ellen White, clean up. Just absolutely silent from her on this. So this 1847 vision of hers, which Adventists believe this is why they're celebrating the Sabbath today, this is a vision of the 6 o'clock Sabbath. It's not the sunset Sabbath, because that's the Sabbath that they were observing for 1847 to 1855. This SDA third angel is confused to this day. Look at him right here. He's going, hey, somebody please tell me which Sabbath I'm supposed to judge when I come back. The sunset one, the 6 o'clock one, I don't know. Which one? Confusion reigns in Seventh-day Adventism. One last issue. This confused spirit of prophecy and this whole Sabbath confusion just continues here, and they keep putting it in writing in books, which I absolutely love. Here's 1915, the year Ellen White died. Life Sketches of Ellen White in 1915. She's going to talk about this very same vision that she gave in 1847 in this book. Let's look here. So here's the 1915 book that I just held up, and on page 96 she makes this comment. It's the restoration of the true Sabbath. Oh, isn't that interesting? You know what this is? What's going on here in 1915? What was not going on here in 1882? This doesn't tell us the Sabbath was restored in 1882. This one talks about a restoration. Does she know what she just said? If this is the restoration of the Sabbath, this is the restoration of the 6 o'clock Sabbath. But she's writing this in 1915. After the Sabbath was changed by satanic evil Sabbath changer J.N. Andrews. Which, exactly what was restored? 6 o'clock? Sunset to sunset? Just utter confusion reigns. So this April of 1847 Sabbath vision here, like I said, is a Sabbath for the wrong time. Given that there's been no correction issued, this vision is about a 6 o'clock Sabbath and nothing else. Unless you Seventh-day Adventists want to say, God changed. I guess God did change. Because God says, this Sabbath here is, 6 o'clock. Or is it sunset to sunset? I don't know. God does change. The Seventh-day Adventist God, which is a fake God, does change. Anyway, in summary, right here, we have the satanic Sabbath changer J.N. Andrews, who changed times, Daniel 7:25. He changed times in November, published it in December of 1855. We got a very confused third angel here, who doesn't know, when I come back, which Sabbath am I going to judge? I'm going to judge the 6 o'clock one, the sunset one of them, both of them, none of them, who knows? Then we got crazy Ellen White here, referring back to her 1847 vision when she was keeping the Sabbath at 6 o'clock, writing about the Sabbath being restored in 1915 when they were keeping a sunset to sunset Sabbath. So what was restored? Who knows? Anyway, a third part is going to follow this video, and it's going to be great. It's going to be just on the vision. So this Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath history is utterly confusing during this period of 9 years and 470 doctrinally wrong Sabbath. Just which Sabbath is supposed to be restored, as she says, I don't know, 6 o'clock, sunset to sunset. Ellen White is a very confused spirit of prophecy, so-called Sabbath keeper. The third angel doesn't even know which Sabbath he's supposed to judge when he comes back, because he was born in 1844 and had 2 Sabbaths going on the first 9 years of his life, so he doesn't know which Sabbath to judge. And Andrews, as we know, is just like the mean, evil, nasty Pope that we saw with blood on his hands. And Andrews changed times. Like the Pope changed times and laws, Andrew changed times. Seventh-day Adventists, you're just Sabbath changers just like the Pope.